A single drop of this clear, amber liquid could strip the leaves off an entire forest. But its most terrifying target was hidden deep inside the braid, human genetic code, developed in secret laboratories as a botanical breakthrough. This synthetic compound was deployed across millions of acres under the guise of tactical defense. Yet, the military planners who authorized its use failed to foresee, or chose to ignore, a fatal manufacturing flaw that transformed a simple weed killer into one of the most persistent poisons on Earth. How did a scientific shortcut designed to save soldiers' lives end up waging a slow, multi-generational war against the very land and people it touched? The answer lies not just in the sheer volume of chemical defoliants dropped from the sky, but in a catastrophic manufacturing shortcut that introduced one of the most toxic synthetic substances known to science into the soil of Southeast Asia. For decades, the true scale of this disaster was obscured by TCDD, corporate denials, military secrecy, and geopolitical standoff. Today, we look beyond the political rhetoric to examine the cold, hard science of Agent Orange, tracing its journey from the high-tech laboratories of American chemical companies to the quiet villages of Vietnam, where third and fourth generations are still paying the price for a war that ended long before they were born. This is the story of a weapon that never stopped fighting, transforming lush ecosystems into toxic wastelands and leaving a biological legacy that continues to challenge our understanding of human rights, corporate responsibility, and the true cost of modern warfare. To understand this tragedy, we must examine the intersection of military urgency, corporate negligence, and the fragile balance of our natural world. We must ask how a modern society could unleash an ecological disruption of this magnitude without fully understanding the long-term biological consequences. This exploration is not about assigning simple blame, but about uncovering the documented scientific facts, the historical decisions, and the enduring human stories that define this dark chapter of the 20th century. Through archival records, scientific studies, and the testimonies of those who lived through the spraying, we will piece together the complex reality of a chemical intervention that permanently altered the landscape and the genetic future of an entire nation. The legacy of Agent Orange is not merely historical, it is a living, ongoing crisis that demands our attention and our collective reflection on the ethical boundaries of science and warfare. To understand how this ecological tragedy unfolded, we must return to the early years of the Second Indochina War, a period defined by intense Cold War anxieties and unconventional military tactics. By 1961, the base beacon setter accessed United States was deeply committed to supporting the Republic of Vietnam in the South against the communist insurgency led by the National Liberation Front, commonly known as the Viet Cong. The American military faced a formidable tactical obstacle: the geography of Vietnam itself. The country was covered in dense, triple canopy tropical rainforests, rugged mountain ranges, and vast mangrove swamps. This environment provided perfect concealment for guerrilla forces who utilized a complex network of trails, hidden base camps, and supply lines to launch surprise attacks before vanishing back into the jungle. Traditional military reconnaissance was rendered nearly useless from the air, as the thick vegetation completely blocked the view of aerial observers. In response, joint military planners proposed a radical solution. If they could not find the enemy in the forest, they would remove the forest itself. Under the administration of President John F. Kennedy, the United States Air Force initiated Operation Ranch Hand in late 1961. The operational motto, written with grim irony on the walls of their headquarters, was, "Only you can prevent forests." The objective was twofold: First, to defoliate the jungle along major transportation routes, canals, and border areas to prevent ambushes. And second, to destroy agricultural crops that might feed the insurgent forces. What began as a limited, experimental program quickly expanded into a massive, systematic campaign of environmental modification. The military relied on a series of commercial herbicides, color-coded by the bands, painted on the shipping barrels. There was Agent Pink, Agent Green, Agent Purple, and eventually, the most famous and widely used of them all, Agent Orange. This systematic clearing of the landscape was viewed by military strategists as a clean, high-tech alternative to costly, ground combat, a way to use American industrial superiority to neutralize the geographic advantages of the guerrilla fighters. They believed that by stripping away the cover of the jungle, they could force the conflict into the open where superior firepower would guarantee a swift victory. This tactical shift marked a transition in the nature of modern warfare, where the environment itself became an active combatant and a target of systematic destruction, setting a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. The science behind Agent Orange was deceptively simple, rooted in agricultural developments from the mid-20th century. It was a 50-50 mixture of two commercial herbicides, 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid, known as 2,4-D, and 2,4,5-trichlorophenoxyacetic acid, known as 2,4,5-T. Both chemicals were synthetic plant hormones called auxins. When sprayed on broadleaf plants, they caused rapid, uncontrolled growth, essentially forcing the plants to grow themselves to death within weeks. In normal agricultural settings, these chemicals were used in highly diluted quantities to control weeds in crop fields. However, for military operations in Vietnam, the concentration was increased up to 20 times the recommended agricultural rate. As the war escalated in the mid-1960s, the demand for Agent Orange skyrocketed, outstripping the standard production capacity of the chemical industry. The United States government invoked the Defense Production Act, forcing chemical manufacturing giants like Dow Chemical, Monsanto, Hercules, and Diamond Shamrock to produce the herbicides at maximum capacity. To meet these massive military quotas, some manufacturers accelerated the chemical synthesis process for 2,4,5-T. This acceleration required running the chemical reactions at much higher temperatures than normal. This industrial shortcut had a fatal, silent consequence. Under high heat, a highly toxic byproduct was spontaneously generated. 2,3,7,8-tetrachlorodibenzo-P-dioxin, commonly referred to as TCDD, or simply dioxin. Dioxin was not an active ingredient in the defoliant. It was an unwanted, accidental contaminant. But it was a contaminant of unprecedented toxicity. Even in microscopic quantities, dioxin disrupts cellular processes, damages the immune system, and alters genetic expression. The chemical companies were aware of this contamination as early as the mid-1960s, as internal memos and laboratory tests revealed that the accelerated production method was creating a highly toxic substance. However, the military demand remained paramount, and the spraying continued unabated, with the government and the public largely kept in the dark about the invisible poison mixed into every barrel of Agent Orange. This decision to prioritize short-term military objectives over long-term environmental and human health safety would have catastrophic consequences that would last for generations, illustrating the extreme dangers of unregulated industrial science in times of total war. The chemical synthesis of 2,4,5-T was a delicate process that required precise temperature controls to prevent the formation of unwanted byproducts. However, under the intense pressure of wartime production schedules, these safety protocols were often compromised. The resulting contamination of Agent Orange with TCDD was not an inevitable consequence of herbicide production, but a direct result of industrial shortcuts taken to maximize output. This critical distinction highlights the intersection of corporate liability and military urgency, where the desire for rapid results overshadowed the known risks of chemical contamination, leaving a legacy of toxic exposure that would affect millions of people. Between 1961 and 1971, Operation Ranch Hand reached its devastating peak, transforming the Vietnamese landscape into a giant laboratory for chemical defoliation. Fleet after fleet of UC-123 provider cargo aircraft, flying in tight formations just above the treetops, sprayed a fine, oily mist across the countryside. Over the course of the war, approximately 20 million gallons of these chemical herbicides were unleashed over South Vietnam, southern Laos, and parts of Cambodia. Agent Orange accounted for more than 60% of this total volume. The ecological shock was immediate and apocalyptic. Within days of a spraying mission, leaves withered, turned brown, and fell, turning vibrant green canopies into ghostly forests of gray, skeletal trees. Mangrove forests along the coastlines, which were highly sensitive to the chemicals, were completely wiped out in a single application, leaving mudflats vulnerable to severe erosion and destroying vital habitats for fish and wildlife. The food destruction program targeted rice paddies and orchards, destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of peasant farmers and forcing them to flee to overcrowded urban slums. It is estimated that nearly 5 million acres of forest and over 500,000 acres of crops were heavily damaged or destroyed. But the ecological destruction was only the surface of the bug disaster. The silent rain of Agent Orange fell directly onto military personnel operating on the ground, river patrol crews, and millions of Vietnamese civilians living in rural villages. The chemical settled into the soil, washed into the rivers, and saturated the wetlands, introducing an estimated 366 kilograms of pure dioxin directly into the Vietnamese environment. This was not a localized spill. It was a nationwide saturation of a persistent organic pollutant that would remain active in the ecosystem for generations, waiting to enter the biological cycle of life. The immediate military utility of clearing the jungle was quickly overshadowed by the profound, permanent alteration of the landscape, creating a wounded environment that could no longer support the diverse life forms that had thrived there for millennia. The physical reality of the spraying missions was terrifying for those on the ground. The low-flying aircraft released a dense mist that settled over villages, rivers, and fields, coating everything in a sticky chemical residue. For many Vietnamese peasants, the immediate effect was the destruction of their crops, which led to widespread food shortages and forced migration. The long-term ecological damage was severe, with large areas of forest converted into unproductive grasslands dominated by invasive species. This transformation of the landscape, known as ecological degradation, severely reduced the biodiversity of the region and disrupted the natural balance of the ecosystem for decades. As the 1960s drew to a close, the scientific community began to sound the alarm about the potential human and environmental costs of this massive chemical campaign. In 1969, a study conducted by the Bionetics Research Laboratories, which had been commissioned by the National Cancer Institute, revealed that even low doses of 2,4,5-T caused severe birth defects and stillbirths in laboratory mice. This revelation sparked intense public and scientific outcry, leading the United States military to suspend the use of Agent Orange in 1970 and officially conclude Operation Ranch Hand in 1971. The war eventually ended in 1975, but the chemical legacy remained firmly rooted in the soil. Unlike the active herbicides, which degraded in sunlight within a few weeks. The contaminant dioxin was incredibly stable. Dioxin does not dissolve easily in water, nor does it break down readily in the environment. Instead, it binds tightly to organic matter in the soil and river sediments, resisting natural decomposition. Over the decades, Canadian and Vietnamese scientists tracking the chemical found that dioxin had entered the local food chain. It was absorbed by bottom-feeding fish, crabs, and ducks, bioaccumulating in their fatty tissues. When local populations consumed these animals, they ingested concentrated doses of the toxin. Scientists identified specific hotspots where dioxin levels remained dangerously high decades after the war. These hotspots were concentrated around former U.S. military air bases, such as Da Nang, Bien, Hoa, and Phu Cat, where Agent Orange had been stored, mixed, loaded onto aircraft, and occasionally spilled in large quantities. In these areas, the chemical remained a living, active threat to public health, leaching into shallow wells, municipal water supplies, and the bodies of local residents who consumed fish from nearby ponds. This persistence of dioxin meant that the end of the war did not bring peace to the land. Instead, the conflict was preserved in the very dirt, beneath the feet of the survivors, waiting to claim new victims. The scientific investigation into the persistence of dioxin in the Vietnamese environment revealed a complex process of bioaccumulation because dioxin is highly lipophilic, meaning it dissolves in fats rather than water. It accumulates in the fatty tissues of organisms and becomes more concentrated as it moves up the food chain. This bioaccumulation process meant that even low levels of environmental contamination could lead to dangerously high concentrations of dioxin in human breast milk, blood. The identification of specific dioxin hotspots around former military bases provided a clear scientific link between the wartime spraying and the ongoing public health crisis, demonstrating that the environmental damage was concentrated and persistent. The human cost of this environmental saturation soon manifested in a devastating public health crisis that transcended political boundaries. In the decades following the war, Vietnamese medical researchers, international observers, documented unusually high rates of severe health anomalies. These included rare cancers, type 2 diabetes, and severe neurological disorders among those exposed to the chemicals. Most tragically, the effects appeared to pass down through generations. Children in sprayed areas and those born to exposed parents were born with profound physical deformities, missing limbs, spinal abnormalities, and severe cognitive disabilities. This biological crisis triggered a long and bitter struggle for justice and human rights. In 1984, American veterans who suffered from similar illnesses reached an out-of-court settlement with the chemical manufacturers for $180 million. However, the Vietnamese victims faced a much more difficult path. In 2004, the Vietnam Association for Victims of Agent Orange filed a class action lawsuit in a United States federal court against 37 chemical companies. The lawsuit argued that the use of these defoliants violated international law against chemical warfare. The U.S. courts ultimately dismissed the case, ruling that the herbicides were not used as chemical weapons targeted at humans, but rather as defoliants to clear vegetation, and therefore did not constitute a violation of international law. This legal distinction highlighted a profound gap in international justice, leaving millions of Vietnamese victims to rely on limited domestic support and international non-governmental organizations for medical care, rehabilitation, and basic survival, raising deep questions about accountability in modern conflict. The legal battle exposed the limitations of existing international treaties in addressing the long-term, indirect consequences of environmental warfare. leaving a legacy of unresolved grievances and a continuous struggle for recognition and support that persists to this day. The struggle for justice for the victims of Agent Orange has been marked by significant legal and political obstacles. While American veterans were eventually able to secure some compensation and medical benefits through legal settlements and government programs, Vietnamese victims have faced a lack of legal recourse in international and domestic courts. This disparity in treatment highlights the challenges of achieving accountability for environmental damage and human health impacts caused by military actions. The ongoing efforts of advocacy groups and non-governmental organizations remain critical in BC, providing support and raising awareness about the enduring human cost of chemical defoliants. Today, more than 50 years after the last spray mission, the landscape of this tragedy is slowly beginning to change. In recent years, a historic partnership has emerged between the United States and Vietnam to finally address the physical remnants of the war. Massive, high-tech, environmental remediation projects have successfully cleaned the heavily contaminated soil at Da Nang International Airport, utilizing thermal desorption technology to bake the dioxin out of the earth at extreme temperatures. A similar, even larger cleanup effort is currently underway at the Bien Hoa Airbase, which represents the largest remaining dioxin hotspot in the country. While these engineering feats can purify the soil, they cannot easily repair the damaged DNA of the families living in the shadow of these hotspots. The story of Agent Orange serves as a stark, cautionary lesson about the long-term consequences of military technology and the concept of ecocide, the deliberate destruction of the natural environment during conflict. It forces us to ask critical questions about the responsibility of nations and corporations for the long-term consequences of their actions. What do you think about the ethical responsibilities of chemical manufacturers in times of war? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to support deeper historical and scientific investigations into the Bellabaders events that shaped our modern world, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with others. By keeping these stories alive, we ensure that the human costs of war are never forgotten and that future generations understand the true price of ecological disruption. Your engagement helps us continue producing high-quality, research-driven historical content that sheds light on the complex realities of our shared past. Thank you for watching, and join us in our mission to explore the historical events that continue to define the modern world. The collaborative efforts between the United States and Vietnam to clean up the contaminated sites represent a significant step toward healing the wounds of the war. These remediation projects, though costly and technically challenging, demonstrate that international cooperation can address even the most difficult environmental legacies of conflict. However, the physical cleanup of the soil is only one part of the solution. The ongoing medical and social support for affected families remains a critical need. By confronting the legacy of Agent Orange, we are reminded of the profound responsibility we have to protect our planet and its inhabitants from the devastating impacts of modern warfare.